Hello, thanks for joining me. As you can see, I'm in the workshop and I'm with my Triumph Bonneville T140. Now it's beginning of April time here, and in the UK it's spring starting to open up, and I've had this bike off the road over winter, so I'm just about to go through some pre-ride checks with it before I get it back out on the road, and I thought that might make an interesting video. Now, a lot of people take their bikes off the road in the winter in the UK, and it's not because the roads are unrideable because of snow, but it's mainly because of the amount of salt which they put on the roads, and that's so damaging to the bikes. Because I own several bikes, I keep some of them on the road over winter, but the Bonneville T140 and my Norton Commando, I don't ride over the winter. I take those off the road just to protect them from salt damage. So it's about to come back on the road, so I'm sort of recommissioning it. Thought it'd make an interesting video just to show you the pre-ride checks that I go through before I get back on the road with it. So let's go through the checks. So the first thing I have a look at is the petrol. Now, before I put the bike into storage, this is more of a thing you need to do before storage rather than after. Before I put the bike into storage, I fill the tank right up, and I fill it up with high octane fuel and the low ethanol fuel. So the lowest ethanol we can get here, this part of the world where I live, is 5% E5. So I fill the tank right up with E5, and I also put some stabile, I think it's pronounced, in with it. I'll show you the stabile. Here you are. This is the stabile. So obviously it's a play on words, as in stabilise. So the idea is that before you put the bike away for winter, you put some of this in the petrol tank, and there's instructions on the back, and it sort of measure out the right amount, and then you run the bike for a little while, so that runs through into the carburetors, or if you've got fuel injectors, it runs through into the fuel injectors, and so it's treating the fuel all the way through the system. So the idea is, with having the lower ethanol fuel in there to start with, and then putting this stuff in with it, your fuel should be okay over winter. And the idea of filling up the fuel tank is so that there's no space in there for damp air, so that water can absorb into the fuel in the petrol tank. So that's the first thing. So I'm just going to check the petrol tank and make sure everything's okay with that. So yeah, the tank's still full of fuel. I can see in there's absolutely no corrosion in the tank, so I think we're good there, but we'll find out once we start the bike up. So that's my petrol, that's the first thing. Next thing I'll do is check the oil. I did top up the oil on the bike before I put it into storage for winter, so really all I'm checking for now is that the bike hasn't wet sumped over the winter. I know there's been no oil leakage because it's been parked up here in the garage and there was no oil loss, and so I can see straight away there the oil is up to the top level. I can see it in the tank, but I don't know if you can see there on the dipstick, it's right up to the top level there, so that means my oil level is absolutely fine and there has been no wet sumping over the winter. Great. The next thing I'm going to check is my brakes and the whole brake system. So I'm going to be looking at the brake pads, making sure they're okay, looking at the discs. Obviously on these bikes you always get a bit of surface rust on the discs over winter, and that's nothing to worry about. But checking all the brake lines as well, and then checking the fluid levels in the master cylinders, front and rear. Right, this is the rear brake caliper, and because this is underslung, you can see it's very low, and it's actually very difficult to get in there to show you. I've just checked the pads myself and they're fine, but just seeing if I can get the camera in there so you can also see. Focus. Ah, yeah, there, look at that. Actually, that's a very good way of checking the brake pads. So you can see there's absolute loads of material left on the brake pads, and I can see there's no breakage on them or anything like that. They look absolutely fine, and the disc is okay as well. Get a torch on that. Just a bit of surface rust on that. That's absolutely fine. So then I check all the brake lines. So we're looking down there, you can see the copper line there. Make sure that there's no leaks, no damage to the line. There's the rubberized line runs up here. That's the brake switch, the rear brake switch. I'll check that when I check all the electrics. The rear brake fluid reservoir is under the seat here. So I'm just going to check the level of that and take the lid off. There's a little washer sits inside the lid here. Got to make sure that that stays in place, that it's in good condition. And then there's this diaphragm. And one of the things I always check for is whether there's any moisture, any condensation on top of the diaphragm. I can see there's none there. There's a little bit of, this is just a bit of brake fluid on there. You can usually tell if it's got condensation on it because it tends to bead. So I take the diaphragm out and check the fluid level. Well, the fluid level, it's about halfway up the cylinder, but to be honest, I think it could do with just a little bit more in. So I don't know if you can just make out the level in there. I'm just going to top that up with a little bit more fluid. Got a new bottle of DOT 4 brake fluid here, so I'll open this and then just very gently top up that cylinder just a little bit. That's enough, that's all it needs. Okay, happy with that. Put the diaphragm back in and the lid. Mustn't overfill it, otherwise it's going to spill out and get brake fluid running down. That's fine. Okay, right, check the front. The same way that I check the fluid level for the rear brake, I'll check the fluid level on the front reservoir here. So again, there's this washer which needs to sit inside the lid, and then there's the diaphragm, exactly the same as the rear. And yeah, that's fine. Don't know if you can see there, but that level is about 2/3 of the way up the cylinder. Right, okay, put that back together. So checking the brake line here, that's the front brake switch there, that mechanism. Then you've got a bit of metal pipe. Again, I'm just checking to make sure there's no leakage or any damage. Then running down the pipe, I'm just showing in the video, I'm actually going to feel it in a second. And then again the junction at the bottom there down to the front caliper and the pads, and you can see there's loads of wear. You can see those pads easily. There's loads of wear left on the front pads there. So that all looks absolutely fine to me. The brakes. Last thing I'm going to do with the brakes is just check the feel of the travel of the brake pedal and the brake lever. So that's absolutely perfect, that rear brake. I'll just show you. Press it up. Not a lot of movement, and it feels very firm. I press it down. When I take the bike out for the first time, I'll do a rolling brake test on it, just as I set off down the road, in the first 100 yards or so. Just check both the brakes to make sure they're functioning properly. But it's a good idea just to check them like this in the workshop first. Let's check the front brake. So check the feel of the front brake there. That feels good to me. I'm happy with that. Yeah. That's the way I would expect it to be. So, I think the brakes are fine. Let's move on. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is to lubricate and adjust my cables, particularly the clutch cable and the throttle cable. Now, the throttle cable I treat with light oil, but the clutch cable I put grease on it. So in order to do that, I need to disconnect it here. And then I can put my grease gun on the end and squeeze some grease down inside the cable housing. So to get the cable off to lubricate it, I've loosened it off at the other end, at the clutch end, and then you just have to slip this housing out of here. So normally what I do is that's right, pull it round like that, and then the ball comes out of the lever, and then if you can see what I'm doing there, that little adjuster comes off, and then I've got the bare cable here. So I have a grease gun to force grease down inside the housing. So the way it works is you've got this collet here that you slide over the cable outer, then you slip these washers on, make sure that they split at the washers in different places, and then this is the grease gun. I've got it full of grease here. You push the end of the cable in there, and then we've got to seat those washers and seat them over the cable outer, so it seals the cable outer and pushes the grease down inside. And that's by necessity a tight fit, of course. So just give me a minute, I'll fiddle around with this, then I'll come back to you. Right, I'm back on air again. So the way this works is, explain again, I've slipped this over the cable housing here, and there's a couple of washers then that seal that. The actual cables up inside are then packed this tube out with grease, and then there's a plunger on this end, which when I screw this down, the plunger, the idea is that plunger then forces the grease down the inside of the cable housing and greases the cable inside. That's the theory, anyway. Okay, this is the clutch cable, this is the clutch end. So in order to get that slack, I'd taken the adjuster all the way down. So I'll wind this up again to take up the slack. And then there's a lock nut here. It just winds down. Nip that down and that holds the adjuster in place. Oh, wrong spanner, this one. Okay, that's just nipped that up. So good then. Actually, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of grease come through there, so that shows that the grease has gone all the way down the cable. And put that little boot over there, and then I'll do the fine adjustment up at the handlebar end. Having taken up the slack on the cable at the clutch end, I'm just checking the fine adjustment here. It make a fine adjustment with this adjustment here, but looking at that, it's about right. You can see got a little bit of a gap there before the cable comes tight. Always reckoned when I was younger, if you could just get a coin in there, just get a coin wedged in that space, then that was about enough. So just pump the clutch a few times. Even though I've just lubricated it, it's still like a bull worker, but that's what these clutches are like. And you see, that's the loose play on it. So yeah, I'm happy with that. That's good. The next thing I'm going to check is the chain and sprocket. So if I get in here, hopefully you can see that's just oil off the chain on the sprocket there. You can see there's hardly anywhere. It's a fairly new sprocket on the back of here, so you can see there's hardly any wear at all on the sprocket there. The chain's also in really nice condition. I oiled it. It's a fairly new chain. I oiled it before I put it away, and get the light round here. You can see it's fine, and the tension should be fine, because again I checked that just before I put it away. But just yeah, it's quite on the loose side, is that, but I tend to run with my chain on the loose side. It's a habit from doing off-road riding. It's not too loose. That maybe it needs just nipping up a little bit, we'll see. Let's take a bit of slack out of this chain. So I've just loosened off the rear axle. There's just a nut on the other side, on the right hand side of the bike, and then these are the adjusters here. So there's they're both 7/16, so there's a lock nut on there which you can just ease off, just slacken that off, and then need to screw this adjuster in a little bit just to take up some of the tension. And of course you need to do it equally on both sides. Unfortunately you can't see the chain very well there because the exhaust's in the way, but there's still quite a bit of play in there, so I'm going to just give that a couple of turns and then do the other side as well equally. One thing you have to do is just turn the back wheel and check the chain in different places, because there's usually a tight spot on the chain, so you don't want to adjust it on a slack spot and then find it's too late on too tight on the tight spot. So I can feel it's a lot slacker there, for example, so just keep turning round. I get the tightest bit. I'm going to say, I mentioned earlier, I like to run my chains fairly loose, but once I start adjusting this one, I find it's actually quite a bit looser than I thought, so I'm going to take quite a bit of the slack out of it. If you want to be accurate about getting the adjustment on the chain right, one thing you can do is use something like this. I've got this tool here, which is called a true tension chain monkey, and the idea is you put this on your chain and you clamp it up at the bottom here, and what that does then is creates a little kink in your chain which takes up the slack to the degree that you want. You then adjust the chain until it's tight, and then once you tighten up the axle again, you take this off, you've got the required amount of slack in it. However, I'm just going to eyeball it today on this chain. Another thing that's important when you're adjusting the chain is getting it true, making sure that the back wheel is true, straight. Otherwise, if the back wheel is out of alignment slightly, your rear sprocket is not going to be running straight with your chain and your front sprocket, and that's going to increase wear. Now, on most bikes, there's some kind of calibration back here, but this being an older bike, there's nothing like that, and so you can eyeball it, or you can use something like this. I've got this tool here, and you clamp this onto your rear sprocket, and then this rod here should run straight along your chain. So you sort of get behind the bike and have a look along and make sure that this rod is running straight along the chain. So I'm just going to clamp this on here, and then I can eyeball that from the back and make sure that I've got both sides of the chain adjusted. Both sides of the axle adjusted the same. Next thing I'm going to check is my spark plugs. I'm going to remove, clean, and recheck the gap on both of my spark plugs, and also just check the condition of them. Give me an indication of how the bike was running just before it went away, before it was put away for the winter. Right, so that's the first plug out. As you can see, sort of sooty is that. Looks like it's possibly running a little bit rich on that cylinder, though it's hard to say. I don't want to make too much of a judgment on that, because just before I put the bike away for winter, I put that stabile in it and then just ran it, for a couple of minutes, tick over in the garage. So it's not had a good run, but that does look like it's running a bit rich. But anyway, I'll clean that off now, and I'll just recheck the gap, and then I'll do the other one as well. And the plug gap on this is 25 thou, so just check it. That's 25, and that actually slides in very easily. I can actually rock that, so that's maybe just a little bit too broad, which makes me wonder if the plug is. Let's have a look at this plug, if it's worn. No, it looks okay. Looks okay to me. So I'll bring it in, see if it'll focus on that if I bring it right in. Yeah. Just looking at the electrodes there to see if they're warm, but they don't look to me. So I'm just going to close that gap very slightly, just so that I get a a slide, but a tight slide fit at 25 thou. Ah, right, lovely. We see now it goes in. That's the 25 thou goes in, but it's just it's just a slightly tight fit in there, which I'm happy with, and everything's lined up nicely there. Right, pop that spark plug back in. Just nip that up very lightly. Don't want to over tighten it. Okay, let's check the other side. The left side spark plug. Let's have a look at this one. That's very sooty as well. The fact that they're both sooty like that makes me think it was just because I just ran it very briefly. And it was probably running on the choke, to be honest, before I put it away. So I'm not going to worry Julie about that. So that one needs cleaning up, and I'll check the gap on that one as well. Okay, so we focus. Yep, I've cleaned up that and checked the gap. I just closed that one up just a tiny little bit as well. Again, there was just a little bit of movement on that 25 thou gauge, so just cleaned it up. So let's whack this back in. Again, just nip that up, but not too much. I'll run that through there and pop that on. Okay, spark plug's done. The next thing I'm going to check is my battery. Now, I've actually had the battery on a battery tender, had it on an Optimate 4 over winter, so that should have looked after it. This is the Optimate lead here, connects round, so I keep that on the battery all the time. So I know the battery's being looked after, and the Optimate showed it's fine. But I'll just show you checking the battery. I mean, this is a wet battery, so first thing is, if I just lift it out a little bit, you can actually check the fluid level along the side here, and just make sure all the cells have got enough fluid, and if necessary, you might have to top some with some distilled water, but that all looks absolutely fine to me. I just keep this little bit of foam down the front of there, really just to cut down vibration for the battery. The other thing you can do is you can just check the battery output. I've got an electric meter here, so if I can put that somewhere where you can see the readout of that. Put it there, you can see the readout, and then just check put the leads onto the battery terminals and see what we're getting. So you can see that that's 12.68 volts, just under 12.7 volts, which looks healthy to me. If you haven't got an electric meter, a cheaper alternative for checking batteries is one of these. This was literally just a couple of pounds, and you just connect it. It's got a couple of crocodile clips on it. You just connect it up to the battery terminals, and then it lights up and it shows you. So that's lighting up. Oh, sorry, get that in the camera. So that's lighting up the first three, which comes up to 12.6, which says that the battery is fully charged. The ones above this line are for checking the battery with the engine running to make sure it's charging properly. So if I was to start the engine with this connected, the next light should go up to show that it's charging okay. If these lights here light up, that means that there's a bit too much voltage going into the battery, but that's showing that the battery is absolutely fine, which I knew it would be anyway because it's been on the Optimate all winter. The next thing I'm going to check is my wheels and tyres, so and check the wheel bearings just by trying to move the wheel sideways against the forks, and there's absolutely no play in that. And then check the condition of the tyre. This is a fairly new tyre, and there's loads and loads of tread on this. Just going around checking all the tread. There's no splits or cracks or damage to the tyre. I'll check my tyre pressure. I run this bike with 28 psi in the front and 32 in the rear. So just see what we've got here in the front. Yeah, it needs a bit added to that. That's alright, just a little bit. Just boost it up a little bit. So that's the tyre pressure, the treads, the tyre condition checked. I've checked the wheel bearings. So I just checked the spokes as well. I've never had a problem with the front wheel, but on the rear wheel sometimes I get spokes coming loose. These are stainless spokes on here. Got a spoke spanner here, and I just do it like this. Just make sure I haven't got anything that's sounding dead. And as you can hear, they're all nicely tensioned. So I think the front wheel is okay. Turn my attention to the back wheel now. So the back wheel again, I'm just going to check for the wheel bearings. Can't feel any movement in there at all. Feels good. Now check the tyre condition. It's actually not easy for me to do this and not be in the way of the camera. But again, it's a fairly new tyre. It's got loads of tread on it. It's that. I'll check the tyre pressure. I'll check the spokes. So it's this rear wheel that I sometimes have problems with the spokes. So I'll just go around and check these. See, that one's a bit, maybe just could do with just nipping up a little bit. Yeah, again. It's not really loose, but it's just this sort of dead sound. Just like to keep on top of them, just to make sure I don't have problems. Of course, you've got to be careful messing around with the spokes that you don't then end up pulling the wheel out of true. Right, check the tyre pressure now. Bit difficult to get to this one because of the brake discs in the way. Oh, that's it. Again, just with being stood over winter, this has lost some pressure. So I lost quite a bit as the rear. Right, that should be good. Fine. Right, so that's both the wheels checked. Whilst I'm down here at the back of the bike, I'm just going to whack a bit of grease into the bearings in the swing arm. There is a grease nipple here. I will zoom in so you can see that. There's a grease nipple. I'll just get my grease gun on there and squirt a bit of grease in. But I'll zoom in first so you can see where the grease nipple is. Here's the grease nipple. You can see it on the swing arm. So just attach the grease gun to that and squirt a little bit in there. It's if I zoom back out again, you can see where we are. I've squirted some grease into that, so we should be okay there. Just a little bit of grease around there, it's fine. Okay, so that's the swing arm done. I'm now going to check the steering bearings, the head bearings. To check the steering head bearings, I've got the bike on the centre stand and I've got a couple of small blocks under the centre stand so the front wheel is off the ground. because the first thing I want to do is make sure that I've got free and smooth movement all the way around from lock to lock. There's no stiffness or notchiness or anything like that, and that's fine. That's nice and smooth. And then the best way to check for loose steering head bearings is to get your finger in here. This is the bottom clamp here, and then the down tube from the frame, the headstock, sorry, from the frame. If you get your finger in there, so it's resting against both the headstock and the bottom clamp, then you can feel if the one is moving against the other. And then what I do is get hold of the front wheel and really try and pull the front wheel backwards and forwards, and I can feel that there's absolutely no movement in there at all, so that's rock solid. So I'm happy that the steering head bearings are fine. Now I'm going to check the electrics. So if I switch the ignition on, obviously the lights come on. Check the horn, the indicators, so the right's working fine, left's working fine. Check the lights. That's the light on low beam, I can see that's on. High beam, that's working fine. Rear light is on. To switch the lights off, I'll just check the brake lights. So right, rear you can't see, sorry. Rear brake lights working, and front working. That rear one's actually sticking on a bit. It's gone off now, but it was sticking on. Front one's fine, that's fine. That back one was sticking on. No, it's not sticking now. It's just lack of use. Right, that's fine. So all my electrics are fine. Right, so I guess the last job is to see if the little darling will start. So put the fuel on, give it some fuel, give it a bit of choke. Now bear in mind that this bike has not been started for 5 months. Just release the clutch. Right, seems to be okay. Right, we've got choke. Let's see if she'll go.